It's Wednesday, November 27th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast presented by healthcare.gov. It is a hell of a day to talk ball because Thanksgiving is tomorrow, and we have just a fantastic slate of games coming up. A lot of fun things to get into. Joining me to talk a little ball here before the holiday is Sal Vetri. Sal, what's going on, buddy?
Not much. There's baked ziti in the oven as we're talking right now, preparing for the holiday, maybe my favorite holiday. And I'm in Texas, so football starts at 11 a.m. here, so it's good. It's early football all throughout the day, so I can't complain.
I love it. Well, we are going to get into some Thanksgiving potential food discussion at the end of the show. I told Sal I was going to throw him a little curveball for the end of the show, so I want to hear about this baked ziti. We're going to get into all that, but we have a ton of football to get into here, Sal. Normally, we do the Wednesday data dump, but we're not doing that, okay? We're throwing structure to the wind because we have 4 games to talk through here on Thursday and Friday. We've got, and by the way, I think these games actually look a lot better than they might have maybe a couple of weeks ago, so pretty good slate of games to talk through here. We're going to talk through the 3 Thanksgiving games. We're going to talk through the Black Friday game. And Sal, I know this might not be what some people want to hear, but I love this. Okay. I love no segments, no themes, no, all right, you do this, you do that, I do that. We have little assignments. None of that. No. Let's just turn on the damn mics and talk about 4 damn football games. That's why I got into this business, to preview some games. No structure, none of that. Just good old fashioned. Let's talk through these games.
I love it. Yeah, us prisoners are running the asylum this week. We just get to do what we want. And yeah, I like it too. Old school. We run through everything. We can hit on the players that actually matter, go deep into a little bit more of each of these games. And like you said, they're a little bit better, especially 2 of them, than they probably were a month ago.
Oh, man, I love the analogy you just threw out there. All right, let's get into these 4 games here, starting with the first game, Bears at Lions. Lions are a heavy point home favorite, 11 points right now. Pretty beefy total here, Sal Vetri. This one's kicking off at 12:30 Eastern time. I always love this first game. Let's start with the Bears side of things here. What are you looking for? What do you got on your mind when the Bears have the football here?
Yeah, beefy total, and 30 of these points are projected right now for the Lions. So the Bears side of the ball, maybe not as much on the offensive side, but it is interesting to at least look like we're getting a midseason change from the play caller. We now have another week of data, 2 weeks of what they've been doing on offense, who's getting involved more, who they're designing plays for, and it kind of takes me to the wide receiver room. We've seen now, after week 12, a second straight week of DJ Moore getting designed plays. And it's pretty crazy. It's all wide receiver screens. Like, if you look at his average depth of target the past 2 weeks, it's at like 1 yard downfield average depth of target, which is just crazy because of just, 5-6 wide receiver screens are going to do that behind the line of scrimmage. So it's good to see them actually designing him into the offense. We're seeing that come through the past 2 weeks. He now goes from being somebody that you're like, oh, is this going to be a guy who's on my bench the rest of the season? So you feel pretty secure with him in your starting lineup. And I think that's kind of trickled down to the rest of these receivers. I'll kind of give you a chance there to say anything that you've been seeing on DJ Moore, because I also have a lot on Rome Odunze that I'm excited to talk about.
Okay, well, I definitely want to hear about what you got to say on Rome, because I think with DJ Moore, I saw JT O'Sullivan, who has been a bit of a critic on DJ Moore's play when watching Bears film the last 2 years, by what I gather. He basically called him Debo Moore, based on how he's been used. And you know what? Like, I know I'm sure JT means that as a diss, but Sal, I've always said that I wanted to see a team use DJ Moore in some Debo type of ways because he's such a good yards after catch player. And I'm sure this is also one of the things I think has been an issue with the overall just kind of construction of this Bears passing game, is that I do think there's a lot of egos at play. I do think these guys have struggled with, like, okay, who's the primary read? Am I getting the football enough? Because you have 2 former Pro Bowl receivers and a top 10 draft pick here in DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and obviously Rome Odunze. This is a way, I think, to keep DJ Moore engaged in the game and know, like, all right, this ball is coming to me. And he's made plays with the ball in his hands. He's forced 3 missed tackles. He's been the first read on 14 targets, according to fantasy points data here. He's gotten 8 first downs. That's the most on the team. So, yeah, I think this is good usage here for DJ Moore. 3.4 yards after contact per reception, 10.2 yards after catch per reception the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, oh, that's great. He's now getting back into your lineups. And I mean, it makes sense. If you're a new play caller taking over the offense and Thomas Brown, and I would say it has looked much better than with Shane Waldron over these past 2 weeks now, it makes sense to get your number one receiver, the guy who was having a career year last year in this offense, involved, especially for your rookie quarterback in Caleb Williams. Getting the ball out quick also makes sense when it comes to just how the offensive line has looked this year. Shaky in a lot of contests, especially against good defensive lines, which they'll be facing this week with the Detroit Lions. So DJ Moore, yeah, in your lineups. Rome Odunze is interesting to me because we got that like first one-game sample in week 11 where he leads the team with like a 32% target share. The usage was good, not only downfield, but also short to intermediate stuff. And then we kind of saw that same usage this past week, but he's the only receiver who doesn't go off. It's the Keenan Allen game. We just mentioned DJ Moore at length, that is how he was involved. Even Cole Kmet seeing 10 targets in that game sees more receiving yards than Rome Odunze. But in this game, if you watch the targets, again, I'm liking the usage that we're seeing. There's always going to be this overarching thing of there's just so many guys here, so like each week probably 1 to 2 guys are going to miss out. But Odunze usage, the short to intermediate stuff was clicking. The deep stuff, he goes 0 for 4 on deep targets, but honestly, you could argue that all 3 of these, 2 of them were difficult throws, but all 3 of these were on the quarterback, Caleb Williams, 2 of them for potential touchdowns. 1 in the end zone would have been a difficult throw and catch, but he was open for these plays. So I like the way that they're using him right now. I like the way that they're getting him involved in the short to underneath stuff. That's basically how all of his production came this past week. 5 catches for 39 yards, another 10 targets. This is a game where they're 11-point underdogs. I want to say they're probably not going to throw 47 times again like last week, but they might throw 47 times as 11-point underdogs to Detroit. So all the guys should be involved. No teams on bye makes it kind of hard to get excited about Odunze, but in your 12-team leagues with multiple flex spots, I do think he's live, even though he only had 7 or 8 points last week.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the betting lines, like the over-under props here, we've got 55.5 according to BetMGM over-under for DJ Moore. We got 48.5 for Keenan Allen, 42.5 for Rome Odunze. I could see Rome going over 42.5 in this one, just because you mentioned the deep targets. According to Fantasy Points data, he has the lowest catchable target rate of any of these guys over the last 3 weeks, or excuse me, last 2 weeks, which makes sense, right? Because he's been getting those downfield looks. He has the highest average depth of target. And I would like to see more of him at X receiver and more of DJ Moore moved around kind of in that flanker position. But because Rome has been their move around guy, they kind of want to get him on some of these big over routes from the slot, get him a free release and get him running downfield. He has taken 42% of his routes from the slot the last 2 weeks. And typically, when you look at the Detroit Lions, they are vulnerable on the inside. They're vulnerable giving up yards to slot receivers. They defend the outside pretty well. So I could see just even 2-3 catches from Rome potentially going over 42.5 in this game.
Yeah, I like it. And really, honestly, that's all it takes is, arguably 1 catch, but yeah, definitely 2 catches is all you'll need there. And then I guess I'm not, from just watching back last week, I know we had the big Keenan Allen game, and some of the ways in which they were using him, I would say, for the most part, pretty similar, but I don't know if I'm too interested in going back to him. I don't know if I saw enough in a 1-game sample that I'm like, okay, the 35% target share is obviously nice, but is that something that I can rely on next week? Now, you're saying just a matchup in terms of out of the slot is advantageous. So that's somewhere where maybe we're thinking about this. I'm on the fence of it right now. I think he's probably going to be around like that wide receiver 36 range, flex option at best for most people. Where are you at on Keenan Allen?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that because they move Odunze around, it's like Keenan's not a pure slot receiver, which I think he would be better served to be like a 70-80% slot player, but he's at 43% in the last 2 weeks under Thomas Brown's offense. And because DJ Moore is getting so many of these design screens and stuff like that, that leaves Keenan to live in the intermediate area. So I think we've seen over the last 2 weeks just how it can be very up and down for Keenan Allen at this point in his career. I tend to think that more of a man coverage heavy team in Detroit, as opposed to what Minnesota throws at you, that's not really as much of a Keenan Allen game, just in my opinion. I don't think he separates as well against man coverage at this point in his career in those like one-on-one situations. So that would lead me to probably think it's maybe not. I wouldn't personally go back to the well on Keenan Allen, but I could be wrong about that. Yeah,
no, I'm probably leaning the same way. I think the other big decision for this team is the backfield with DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson. We saw in week 11, like Roschon see a season high in snaps, 44%. That kind of dropped, but still was seeing like strong usage in terms of where we care about for fantasy. Got a goal line touchdown again. Is still involved in some of these long down passing situations ahead of DeAndre Swift, which are going to matter this week. And I think this is probably like a tell week as an 11-point underdog. Is Roschon out there more in potential 2-minute offense situations, 3rd down and long? Swift, continues to outtouch him, 16 touches to 3 this past week. You're probably starting Swift in most leagues at this point, but if you're in a situation where you get your guys back from bye, you're loaded at running back, this could be a spot where Swift isn't as advantageous in previous spots when you're 11-point underdog against a top 10 defensive line in Detroit.
Yeah, that was going to be my point. Is fourth in rushing EPA allowed, third in rushing success rate allowed of the Detroit Lions. They're just great up front, and so I could see this being a down Swift game. And if we look on balance, it's funny. Swift is one of the many players who fits the you could be right and wrong about a player over the course of one season, because he started off the year about as bad as you possibly could, went on a fantastic run there in the middle, and lately it's been pretty whatever with him as a fantasy running back, and which is weird because I think the offense has gotten back on track. I just don't think this run game is very good, and I think Detroit's run defense is pretty great, so I could see this being a slow moment for the Bears rushing attack. Before we move to the Lions and what's going to happen when they have the ball, Sal, what are the odds that we just talked all this like matchup related stuff with the wide receivers, and okay, we've got the matchup here with the slot receivers, like Roma Dunze's running these routes in the slot, DJ Moore's getting these design targets. What are the odds that a team last week in Detroit that pressured Anthony Richardson on like 50% of his dropbacks, and Caleb Williams is a guy who's taken a lot of sacks, they've allowed a lot of pressures. What are the odds that, Aleen McNeil, who dominates this game last week, Zadarius Smith has gotten into the action for the Lions, looks pretty good. What are the odds that the Detroit Lions defensive line just ruins this game for the Chicago Bears?
Yeah, pretty decent. We've seen it multiple times this year with the Chicago Bears offensive line. We've seen it with Detroit against other teams that kind of profile out similarly. Look at the Jaguars a couple of weeks ago with a shaky offensive line, and they absolutely dominate them, both on offense and defense getting pressure. So that would be a concern. Maybe it leads to some more Caleb Williams rushing opportunities, scrambles. He's scrambling and running twice as much now in this small 2-week sample. Under Thomas Brown, about 7.5 rush attempts per game compared to 4 to the first 8 to 10 weeks of the season. So maybe that makes him a little bit more appealing, especially in super flex formats with no teams on bye this week. But for the most part, this could just be a blow spot. It could be an ugly early slate, early window game on Thanksgiving. There's a 10-point spread for a reason here, which the Bears side of this is definitely the less attractive side, projected for just 18 points.
5.5 rush attempts over under for Caleb Williams. I might take the over on that man coverage situation defense there on the other side. So I like that point of it. But yeah, I think he's going to be scrambling around a lot. Whether he actually gets past the line of scrimmage on those scrambles, we shall see about that. All right, let's move to the Lions. What's going on when they have the ball? A lot of good stuff's going on when the Lions have the ball. Sal, what do you got your eye on here?
Yeah, they're the exciting part of this offense. You could start with Jared Goff, who's completed an insane at least 72% of his passes in 8 of his last 9 games, multiple touchdown passes in 7 of those 9 games, which is crazy because every week his passing touchdown total continues to be put up, and it's up right now in the prop markets at 1.5 passing touchdowns. And every week I just continue to take it. And at this point, it just feels blind because it's hit so many times. But he is somebody who's just been consistent. A lot of that has to do with the play caller, of course, and Ben Johnson. And I'm looking at the wide receiver room right now because we're starting to see just some, let's just say, shades of week 1 and 2 out of Jameson Williams. He came back from the suspension. We've now seen 3 games, and really these past 2 games, a 20% target share in all 3 games since returning. Week 11, 20% target share, 23 fantasy points. Week 12, 22% target share, 12 fantasy points. Both of those are very usable, especially with a ton of teams on bye last week. And I think you can keep playing this guy because the way that we're seeing crossing routes over the middle of the field, like week 1 and week 2, they've been hitting for him. We're getting more volume now out of him, even with Sam Laporta back and healthy. So Jameson, to me, is a flex option this week, and he's somebody that I think this is an advantageous matchup for him, especially when he's going to continue to not see the main defense's attention when it comes to the running backs and when it comes to Amon-Ra St. Brown being more of a focus.
Love that call on Jameson Williams, especially the routes that you highlighted there, because those to me are where Jameson Williams and the speed is most impactful. Now, it's going to be, I don't think you can map exactly what happened with the Bears defense against the Vikings last week onto the Lions, because St. Brown's a different type of wide receiver in terms of how he's deployed. I don't think they can really line up Jalen Johnson and some of these hard double coverages and get leverage on St. Brown because he moves around. He's a slot receiver. It's not going to be quite the same. But if you think about the ways where Jameson Williams running those routes that you mentioned, those are the routes that Jordan Addison stung this defense on. And I think he is the Bears defense overall has struggled to defend those particular routes, working against the linebackers, working against some of the secondary cornerbacks on that team. So, and Jameson, the targets have been there. He's had a great target share since he's come back from the suspension. I think he's a fantasy starter in this game.
Yeah, and I do too. And he's like the only question mark on this offense outside of, I guess we can get to Sam Laporta, but like everybody else is just, lock and load at this point. Amon-Ra St. Brown's touchdown streak ends last week, but he still gets you 6 catches, 62 yards, and what is like arguably his worst performance of the season. And now he has, I would consider it, at worst an average matchup. Definitely not a difficult matchup against this Chicago secondary, especially when your team's implied for 30 points, you're going to feel good about the wide receiver one. And when you're a 10-point favorite implied for 30 points, you're going to feel good about both the running backs in this game. Jahmyr Gibbs is the healthier one, but it seems David Montgomery, this injury was just, okay, we're up, we're winning, there's no need to go back into this game, and that's what happened last week with Detroit and Montgomery. He seems good to play. You got to play both of them, 10-point favorites. Either way, you're playing both of them, but especially as 10-point favorites in this one, you're getting Gibbs finishing as a top 20 running back in all 6 of his last games with 4 top 5 finishes during that time. I mean, he's a lock and load play. If there was something to come out that he's just not going to be able to play, Gibbs might be the number 1 overall RB. Saquon's in a tough matchup against the Ravens. Gibbs is a 10-point favorite. He probably becomes the RB1 overall for me on the week.
Yeah, I love that. And the Bears have struggled with those perimeter outside runs, and when the Lions can pull someone from the opposite side to just clear one of those massive rushing lanes for Jahmyr Gibbs and he just shoots through the hole, I can picture exactly that type of run that the Bears have given up to the Cardinals, to the last week to Aaron Jones and the Vikings. So it's a pretty ideal spot for Gibbs, even if Montgomery's out there, honestly. And I think Montgomery, if he's active, you got to play him in fantasy, but he probably will at least be somewhat limited in this game, which could just mean more Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, and you're at risk, as honestly, you've seen it over the past month a couple of times for these starters not playing the fourth quarter, especially Montgomery, if he comes in with any type of injury and they get out to a big lead. He's scored in 3 straight games, 9 out of 11 games this season, so you feel pretty confident that he can get at least a couple of red zone carries, secure cash in on one of those for you and make it fine, even if he does leave the game early. You mentioned it. Aaron Jones is like, not the perfect comp, but a nice comp last week for what you can do if you're Jahmyr Gibbs against this defense. Jones goes for 129 total yards after he himself was even banged up the previous week with a rib injury. Gibbs way healthier. I think this is a massive Gibbs spot. In terms of prop markets, total yardage, I haven't looked at that. My guess is it's probably somewhere total yardage in the 80s. Feels pretty fair.
Yeah, and probably not going to be available as the time we're recording this just because we don't know about Montgomery. But I can just see this being I could just envision a bunch of big Jahmyr Gibbs runs against the Chicago Bears. Anything else on this game, or should we move to the next one?
No, I mean, people will be considering Sam Laporta, and at this point, he just kind of feels like any other tight end that the way that he's being used. He had 6 targets last week, just 3 catches for 19 yards. Seems like all the tight ends from tight end 10 to 20, you get 3 or 4 catches, 30, 40 yards, hope for a touchdown. He's obviously in maybe the best offense out of all those guys, so he gets bumped up right around a top 10 tight end, continues to be for me. But if you have the Jonnu Smiths, I'd start him over him. If you have Evan Ingram coming off of a bye, I think I'd even start him, pending Trevor Lawrence status. So Laporta, borderline top 10 guy, probably not a priority.
All right, let's move to the next game here. Another division matchup. Giants at Cowboys, 37.5 point total. Cowboys are 4.5 point home favorites. It's not that this game looks good on paper, Sal. I'd say it's probably the grossest matchup of the 3. Maybe even, I don't know, we'll see about the Raiders and the 4th one there. But it's at least worth noting that, the Cowboys played better last week. But let's focus on the Giants and when they have the ball. What are we looking for here beyond, the Malik Nabers squeaky wheel narrative here? Yeah,
Tommy DeVito versus Cooper Rush on Thanksgiving when you're going up for seconds is something, but I kind of like a 4-point spread here. The game should stay close. Only a 37-point total, which for reference is very similar to what we saw the snow game last Thursday with the Browns close at. So, I mean, that's where we're talking about these offenses, but there's a lot of fantasy assets. On the Giants side of it, yeah, Malik Nabers, there's a lot of panic, and I completely understand that. You had high expectations where you probably took him in hopefully the 5th round of your fantasy drafts. Some people might have had to reach and take him in the 3rd or 4th round of your fantasy drafts. In the first month of the season, he's dropping these 20-point fantasy performances. He's earning 15 targets in games, and it's looking great. And now the past month, it's nowhere like that. But it's still not terrible overall fantasy production. Like, from a real-life standpoint, this offense looks terrible without now Daniel Jones and definitely Andrew Thomas, probably the bigger piece. But over the past month, you're still getting 10 targets per game. You're still getting 65 receiving yards per game. The big thing is he hasn't scored a touchdown. They're not getting to the red zone all that often. So, of course, that's an issue. But now you get the Cowboys, and the Cowboys have been a fix for a lot of offenses this year. I don't know if it's enough to fix Tommy DeVito and this Giants offense, but they rank 30th in coverage according to PFF grades this season. They are allowing the second most receiving yards per play. They rank top 5 in overall fantasy production to wide receivers. Like, this is the get right spot for Malik Nabers, and it kind of starts a nice trend rest of season for him entering the playoffs. So although there's a lot of panic right now, I get it, the quarterback situation is bad. I'm not feeling as bad about Nabers when we just look at this matchup and some of them moving forward, especially because he's basically a shoo-in at this point for 12 to 15 fantasy points, even more if he scores a touchdown.
Right. And I think, as we talked about with Dalton yesterday, this is kind of, I'm not going to say it's like the last spot, but it's where I really want to see with Malik Nabers what we get here. If you just look at Dallas's defense, where they have been super vulnerable is to receivers on the right side, like lined up on the right side of the field. This was a big narrative. Shout out to Rich Rebar, who was the one pointing this out last week, because Terry McLaurin lines up almost exclusively on the left side of the field. When he's on that side of the field, last week, McLaurin has like 16 yards. And of course, he gets just a handful of snaps on the right side because that's classic Cliff Kingsbury stuff. One of which was the 80-plus yard play that ultimately wins it doesn't win in the game, but gets it competitive there at the end. Malik Nabers runs 41% of his routes from the right side of the field, right outside of the field, according to Pro Football Focus. He's in the slot for 22%. He is in on the left, 37%. So maybe there's something there. Of course, it's worth noting, like, Dallas has gotten some players back, like Deron Bland is back in the mix here. So I don't know how sticky that stuff is, but just worth noting if you're trying to get yourself some hope for Malik Nabers here.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, at this point, you're starting him, but I do think you could feel pretty good about starting him this week. I think his player prop was the lowest I've seen it in a minute, 53.5. I ended up taking that earlier this morning. I think that's a number that he's topped in like 80% of his games this year, even with these struggles. Of course, totally different situation, different quarterback now moving forward. But I do like this matchup for him. Other than that, and a reason why you like the matchup for him is, like, there continues to be no target competition. Wan'Dale Robinson, sure, 5 targets last week, catches them all for 47 yards. That's pretty, like, that would probably be the exact box score I would have guessed for him before the game even started, and probably something you could expect moving forward. It's actually Theo Johnson, the rookie tight end, second on the team in targets the past month, 6 targets in 3 straight games. So, like, that's the competition we're talking about here. That's why this game, at least on the Giants side, is implied for 37 points, and they're only implied for like 16 points. There's not many playmakers left here until you go to the running back room, and that's where I think things get interesting with Tyron Tracy and Devin Singletary heading into this matchup. It's a good matchup. Tracy has now fumbled in back-to-back games, so there's a little bit of concerns heading into this one. Will we see a reduced role? Where are you at on that?
Just before we talk about that backfield, Wan'Dale Robinson no longer on pace for 100 catches. He's only on pace for 93.5. So we can take the tracker down at this point. Yeah, 7.2 yards per catch. What a travesty to the sport I love. On the backfield, yeah, I mean, this is probably the biggest pressing fantasy question I think from this game, because Tracy's just been so electric, but he's a rookie running back who's fumbled in some critical spots lately. I don't think that's the damn difference in the Giants winning these games. The Giants have bigger problems than Tyron Tracy, but it's a staff that's on the ropes. People have started to talk about, all right, Brian Daboll might need to win a lot of games here down the stretch to save his job. I don't think he's going to be winning a lot of games here. And yeah, I think that Tracy's I think he's still somebody, if I have him, and I have him at least in one league that's competitive, I'm probably playing him, but it's not with the same like locked in confidence as I walked into last week thinking.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's good to address like the risk and bake that in a little bit here, that his role does drop. That doesn't mean he's now the backup or he's in a 50-50 backfield, but he's not seeing maybe 70 to 80% of the snaps like we've seen in past weeks, because fumbles in back-to-back weeks, one of those before the bye against the Panthers overseas, basically led to them losing the game, which again, they're not really in the business of winning games right now. So maybe that's a positive for the team internally is how they felt. But I think this is something that when you take everything into account, Singletary, a trusted veteran, doesn't really fumble the ball that much. Maybe he gets up to 40 or 45% of the snaps. And if that's the case, I don't think you could have the same expectation for Tracy when you have a realistic outcome of him going for 100 total yards every week. And I think right now the markets aren't adjusting. Like player prop markets, his rushing line is set at 66.5 yards. That feels like a guy they think is going to have the full workload, which I do think there is some risk there. A flex option for sure, but he probably falls outside with no teams on bye, right around that top 24 running back range, probably outside of it for me early on in the ranks right now.
Yeah, hopefully there's nothing to this and we just see a bunch of Tyron Tracy, because I think he's somebody that this team should probably try to count on as a starter, regardless of who's there next year, just so they have one position settled. Before we move on to the Cowboys, I will just note this pass rush in Dallas has been so much better, obviously, since Micah Parsons got back. And DeVito is a sack eater. He is a guy that's going to take a lot of sacks in this game. I wouldn't totally rule out that we see a pretty convincing win by Dallas here. Like I would take Cowboys -4 in this game. I think they could win this one by double digits. I think they're the better team. And I also wouldn't rule out we see like Drew Lock at some point, even by the end of this game, just in case. Just because DeVito's also banged up. If he's taking sacks, he might even come out because of injury and also just due to performance.
Yeah, this was a guy under pressure nonstop last week. Like, it's even hard to evaluate his play. I don't think it would have been all that good, but only averaged 6 yards per attempt, constantly under pressure. Somehow completed 67% of his passes because they're going 5 yards downfield for the most part. So, yeah, wouldn't be shocked if this absolutely blows up. A rare game where the Cowboys are actually favorites.
Speaking of those Cowboys, let's talk about what's going to happen when they have the ball. Cooper Rush, he's been all right the last couple of games, Sal.
Yeah, when you stack him up next to some of the other quarterbacks he's been facing lately and coming into this one, I mean, it's looking better. When you could throw 50 times a game, your stats at the end of the day can, look a little bit better. I think when it comes down to it, like, you're still starting CeeDee Lamb. The ways that they're getting him involved, though, like, it's good that they're getting him involved. It just feels so gross. Like, he was out of the backfield this past week, and they just, like, pooch pass shoveled it to him for, like, 2 to 3 yards. And I'm like, this is the production we're getting now. Nothing set up downfield. Anything for Cooper Rush, 15 to 20 yards downfield, is extremely concerning. Anything 10 yards downfield, watching out routes last week, whether it was Jalen Tolbert, whether it was CeeDee Lamb, it's low, it's outside, it's rushed. And it all makes sense. This is not a seasoned NFL quarterback. He's getting more reps now with the team, which is good each week in practice, but still starting CeeDee Lamb, still don't feel good about it. Nobody else in the passing attack feels good here from a wide receiver standpoint. Good to see the tight ends fill in last week. Luke Schoonemaker ends up catching a touchdown downfield, earns 4 targets. Brevin Spann-Forbes gets involved as well for 3 targets. We'll see what happens with Jake Ferguson. Early on in the week, they didn't feel optimistic of him returning, which would be about 11 days or so from his concussion, which typically you do return from by then, but it's a case-by-case thing. So probably the biggest news to track for the Cowboys and for this game is the status of Jake Ferguson, who would be a fantasy starter if he's active.
Totally agree with that. And yeah, I mean, the CeeDee Lamb usage, I talked about it on the recap show. I know we just talked about it. It's Wan'Dale Robinson-esque, which is gross, which is horrible. CeeDee Lamb is one of the 3 or 5 best receivers in football, and we're talking about him being used like a fake wide receiver. It hurts your soul. Maybe have a couple drinks in you before you watch this game, so you can live with that. But you'll take the points in your lineup at this point.
Yeah, definitely you will. And I think maybe like the biggest thing I'm not looking forward to in this game, but from a fantasy standpoint, as a fantasy manager of this player, definitely am, is what Rico Dowdle's usage looks like coming into week 13 after, like, Mike McCarthy for the 3rd or 4th time this year was quoted to being saying like, yeah, Rico Dowdle's our workhorse. And finally, we got to see it. Like, finally, we've seen glimpses of it, but this is the first time last week. 19 carries, 3 catches, 22 total touches. He wasn't efficient on those, but we have seen him be efficient both last year and earlier this year, so I'm not too concerned about that efficiency. And it's now a great matchup. The Giants allow the most rushing yards per play. It's actually a game where they're favorites in this one at home, so things do set up for another 16 touches for Dowdle in a week where there's no teams on bye. Maybe you don't need him. I know in a lot of leagues that I'm in, I need him as a flex option this week, and I'm going to be playing him for this game on Thanksgiving. So I'm encouraged by the usage last week. The one concern for me is what we're seeing in the passing game. Like, Hunter Lepke continues to be in on the 2-minute offense, continues to be in on long third down. So that other upside to the game for the passing game usage for Dowdle hasn't been there as much lately, as much compared to in the past. So a little bit of a concern, but still somebody that I'm looking to start this week.
Yeah, Giants' run defense is abysmal. Rushing line is kind of high it's like 65.5 according to BetMGM. Wow. That is pretty beefy, but I would take like an anytime touchdown on Rico Dowdle. Just with how bad this run defense is, you're right, they're home favorites. So I would go with a little Rico Dowdle action there in terms of him getting into the end zone. Whew. All right. Anything else you got on this game, or should we take our first break?
No, I think that's good. Watch the Jake Ferguson injury news, and that's the biggest piece for this one.
I mean, my God. Tommy DeVito, Cooper Rush on Thanksgiving. This is what dreams are made of right here, Sal Vetri. While we digest all that, let's take our first break. On the other side, we dive into what's probably the biggest game on the holiday slate in Dolphins Packers right after this. All right, we're back. Let's dive into Dolphins at Packers. Packers are 3-point home favorites, 47.5-point over-under here for the nightcap game, Sal. This one's huge, and I think the biggest reason that we like this game is, let's start with the Dolphins here. The Dolphins have, I'm not going to say they're going to the playoffs or whatever, but they're viable, all right? Like, we can have a discussion about, can Miami sneak into the playoffs? Their season is back on track. And from an offensive perspective, we finally saw a little bit of wide receiver usage last week.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, over the past month of the season and really these last 2 to 3 weeks or so, we're somehow getting even more of the quick passing game with Tua. That's kind of how this offense has been built on. We're getting even more of it, but we're also getting route concepts that reflect that for guys like Jalen Waddle in breaking routes nonstop. I mean, it was spammed all of last week, and it worked. It was great in breaking routes for Jalen Waddle. He has his biggest game of the season in over a year, 144 receiving yards. Finally is able to, probably on a lot of fantasy managers' benches, and now you're in a spot where you're considering, do I play him this week? I think he's somebody you can play this week against Green Bay, a potential shootout with a 47-point total. Tyreek Hill has a down game, but look, when Jalen Waddle's having a borderline career game, when Jonnu Smith continues to erupt, and Devon Achane's catching 2 receiving touchdowns last week, somebody's probably going to miss out. Just so happened to be Tyreek Hill. I don't think there's any concern there outside of the already known wrist injury that he has and he's working through. Reports he has to get surgery after the year, but we already know that. We digest that and we go forward. I think the wide receiver room, you're starting those guys. I think the biggest piece here, though, that I want to talk about, we talked about it last week, is Jonnu Smith, who just continues to produce. Who last week I was like, okay, probably a top 10 tight end rest of the season for me. And now I'm wondering, is this guy a top 5 tight end rest of the season? I have Evan Ingram in some fantasy leagues. Heck, I have Sam Laporte in some fantasy leagues. It's not even a question now. Jonnu Smith is in over them. Did not seem like a thing a month ago. Leads the team in targets ahead of Tyreek since week 5. He's earning a 23% target share since then. Is he just a set it and forget it start now in this, I mean, not even new version of the Miami offense, but just something that seems improved the past month?
I mean, yeah, for sure. Man, his role rocks in this offense. Yeah. And Mike McDaniel's talking about it in press conferences about when the space is there from these wide receivers and Jonnu can make those plays after the catch. It keeps your offense on schedule. It keeps your offense moving down the field. It creates explosives. And they have needed this type of guy for so long. Like, since McDaniel got there, and they immediately are just like, all right, let's play Mike Gesicki, I guess. Now let's get him out of here. You know, they get Devontae Parker off the roster. Mike Gesicki leaves. They never had anybody that could possibly fill the type of role that this guy, Mike McDaniel, wanted in his tight end position. But Jonnu can do it because he can block a little bit, and he is a run after catch player. And whereas Gesicki, when he was there that first year with McDaniel, he was more of he's just like a slot receiver. Jonnu fits the offense. He's exactly the type of player they wanted, and they've needed like this third counterpunch besides Hill and Waddle in the passing game. So I don't see any reason Jonnu's role is going to decrease. Like, could he have a 5-target game and disappoint in fantasy? Yeah, that's like always on the table, but you can't tell me there's 8 tight ends that project better on a weekly basis than Jonnu Smith right now.
You know, I completely agree. Like, there's obviously the caveat to all these players that they are playing on a short week. It's Thursday, and of course that can affect the way the offense is run without as much practice or rest. But for Jonnu, like, I was watching the game last week. I have a couple of Dolphins players in a lot of fantasy teams, including Jonnu now. He's getting put in motion nonstop. He's getting design plays, especially in the red zone. We're seeing design plays for him, which is rather impressive when you have a bunch of other superstars on your team. And now he's facing the Packers linebackers. You're talking about yards after the catch. You're talking about being put in motion as a priority on your offense. Arguably the slowest linebackers in the league are the Packers. They've been much better at tackling this year compared to past years. I have to say that. But I think this is another, smash spot might seem extreme for a guy who's coming off of, averaging 100 yards per game as a tight end the past 2 weeks. But another 4 or 5 catches, another potential touchdown game, 50, 60 yards. That feels more than doable for Jonnu at this point.
Absolutely. I just want to go back to Jalen Waddle because I thought that game was so impactful to just see him actually be used in the ways that he was utilized, because I don't think any of this recent fantasy slump for Jalen Waddle has anything to do with him as a player. I think he's coming off of his best year on film last year, and I think this year he's looked fine to me, but seeing him on those in-breaking routes and seeing him used out of the X receiver position, which is usually his spot in the offense, the furthest outside guy on the line of scrimmage, you saw him more off the line. You saw him get some more of those design targets and some of the big over routes. I just wonder, Sal, if the Dolphins are starting to look, and I could be totally wrong about this, but maybe move away from Tyreek as the number 1 receiver, and like they paid Jalen Waddle, but like long term. I know they adjusted Tyreek's contract to give him more money and things like that, but I don't think Tyreek's looked like the same player. I know he's dealing with the injury. We'll see if that has something to do with it. It's a guy who's also talked about wanting to retire after 2025. I know Tyreek has said a lot of and like maybe none of that matters, but still, like, is he really, he's a 30-year-old receiver who is reliant on, and not fully reliant because he's a good route runner, but still the basis of his game is speed. Waddle's younger. He's paid long-term. He's a really, really good player. I think he would do well to see more of those Tyreek Hill type design targets. And even him, like, running over the middle of the field with those linebackers in zone coverage, because the Packers play zone coverage on 73% of their snaps. I could see another big game here from Jalen Waddle. It's just hard to trust based on the way the season's gone so far.
Yeah, I agree. And if he gets utilization like he did last week, I mean, Jair Alexander for the Packers has been out of the lineup. When he's in the lineup, he's been extremely limited. It's been the case for a couple of years now with Jair, but there's not like no standout cornerback there when it comes to those man-to-man snaps either. Like, it's going to be a good problem to have for Miami in this game, in my opinion, with which guys are earning the targets in this one. And Tua is throwing a lot more. Like, even in a situation last week where they're just absolutely dog walking the Patriots, they're up by 3 to 4 scores, he's still throwing the ball 40 times. Like, he has no, and that's after he was pulled. He gets pulled in that game for like 2 drives or so because of the blowout, comes back in and continues to throw. So they seem over the past 2 to 3 weeks to be a little bit more pass happy. I think they're using that as an extension to the run with Jonnu Smith, with Devon Achane in the pass game. So I think it all looks good for this offense. I think this is a potential shootout. All these Miami guys are in your starting lineups this week, in my opinion. We haven't even touched on Achane. That's how good all these guys have been from a fantasy perspective. And he's been, I mean, we don't have to say too much. He's in your lineups for sure. In 5 games with Tua, he's finished as a top 6 running back in 4 of those. So 2 more receiving touchdowns this past week. I thought he was going to be cold after a slow first quarter, 2 quarters of that game. And then he goes out there and he gets you another 20 plus fantasy points.
We do have to say just one thing before we move on from this game. A little bit of snow forecasted in the Green Bay in Wisconsin. 32 high. Tua in cold weather. Then the narrative, we got to talk about it. I mean, it's at least something to consider here. So while I agree with you, when I'm looking at this game, just weather agnostic, totally agree. High scoring game, could see a lot of really fun performances here in fantasy. But we've seen this offense struggle. I'm not going to say they struggled because it was cold a couple of years ago there in Kansas City or anything like that. But it is an offense that has been built more on speed. You mentioned they're even more pass happy now than maybe they would have been previously. And on the other side, the Packers are just running the piss out of the ball, and they're one of the better run teams right now. They're the lowest neutral pass rate team the last 2 weeks. And really, that's a trend that was happening even before their bye. That could be a problematic situation with the weather there in Wisconsin on Thursday night.
Yeah, the trends and narratives around that are all pretty real at this point. I would say I'll track 1, obviously the weather, but 2, the Vegas totals. This is something that for me personally is just how I decide if I think the weather is going to impact the game. Clearly impacted the game on Thursday Night Football last week, and the Vegas totals reflected that. They dropped the game total in that one by like 6 points, which if it drops by 2 points, something's up. 6 points is like, okay, weather's going to be impactful. As of right now, it hasn't dropped too much. It's about 48 points, 47.5. That implies 22 points or so as a road dog for Miami. That feels good. Track that heading up to the game because we need Miami to be able to actually force Green Bay to throw, because we've seen in 3 out of the last 4 games for Green Bay, they're completely fine having Jordan Love throw the ball legitimately less than 25 times and just lean on Josh Jacobs. Heck, they probably prefer that if they could. Now, Matt LaFleur can scheme the offense. If it has to be a pass-happy approach, you feel good about that with creative plays there as well. But they will lean on Josh Jacobs in this game. So that is a very good point to bring up as well. We kind of need them to force Jacobs or force LaFleur to throw and Jordan Love in this one to get any of our Packers assets in the passing game going.
Let's transition to Green Bay then, because that is a great point. A lot of this depends on what is Miami going to do offensively, which we talked about. I think there's spots that Miami can pick on if the weather's good. And like Sal said, pay attention to the Vegas lines and everything like that for kind of like a little guide in terms of whether this is going to be an issue. But because, man, if it's a snow game, cold weather, night game there in Green Bay, who wants to tackle Josh Jacobs in that game? My ass doesn't. I don't know how many players in Miami are going to want to. In fairness to Miami, they're a top 10 rushing defense by EPA and success rate allowed. This defense, I think, has quietly been really, pretty good all season. But, man, Jacobs in this ground game are just absolutely cooking right now. And LaFleur has said a little bit of stuff this week about, okay, we gotta maybe dial back on Jacobs. We don't want him to just get a ton of work. We'll see. I don't know. This could be yet another big Jacobs game. They might mix in some of the backups, but I imagined that when they wanted to get Josh Jacobs, it was explicitly to run more man gap concepts. So far this year, he has run now 56.4% of his runs out of man gap concepts, according to Fantasy Points data, 4.73 yards per carry. 50% man gap, 50% zone. So about 50-50 there. But the success rate on the man gap runs is 56.4%, which is just awesome. And again, 4.73 yards per carry, 6 touchdowns on gap scheme runs. I imagine this is going to, I don't know. We could talk about the pass catchers. We will talk about the pass catchers, but I just see this as yet another big Josh Jacobs game.
Yeah, I mean, home favorite by 3 points. Teams projected nicely. We've already seen it last week as if they get a lead, what they want to do with that lead, albeit a backup quarterback against the 49ers. But it really doesn't matter. Like, you can run on the 49ers this year, but I would say in general, they still have talent on that defensive line and definitely at linebacker. And we've seen it earlier against the Lions. Like, even if it's a tough matchup, which I think Miami is definitely a tough matchup on the ground, you can still get LaFleur just kind of doing whatever he wants here, whether it's pulling guards, whether it's getting tight ends involved as well in the run game. So I feel confident in Josh Jacobs in this one. He's probably the guy I feel the most confident in this Packers offense, especially if the weather is a risk at all moving forward into this one. The wide receiver room continues to be a throw your hands in the air like you just don't care. We have Romeo Doubs most likely not playing this week with a concussion. So hopefully, and this is the hope, that gets Jayden Reed on the field more. He's been on the field for less than 70% of the routes in 3 of his last 4 games. It's been Doubs and Christian Watson playing a lot more. So hopefully if Doubs does end up missing this one, we see more Jayden Reed. If that leads to them throwing the ball in this game 30 times, you get that 20-25% target share, and we can get him going, because it has not been nice to have fantasy or be a fantasy manager of Jayden Reed the past month to 5 weeks.
No, it has not. And as of right now, even with the assumption, I guess, that Romeo Doubs is not going to play, no Packers wide receiver has a receiving prop line higher than 50.5, which is Jayden Reed. Christian Watson's 44.5. Dontavian Wicks is 35.5. Tucker Kraft, 30.5. I could see this being a Tucker Kraft game, snow game. He's a tough guy to tackle as well. Little just dump it off in the flat if there's any pressure. The Dolphins do a pretty decent job getting pressure on the quarterback. So yeah, it's tough, man. I will say, if they do run the ball a lot, they do get Jayden Reed involved in the run game. That could be kind of maybe another reason to push towards him. But yeah, hopefully with that, if Romeo Doubs isn't playing this game, which is a big loss, by the way, Doubs has played extremely well this season on balance, that we see more of Jayden Reed, because it has been a frustrating lack of Jayden Reed here the last few weeks.
Yeah, and that's also a good point. It is a big loss for them. This is a guy that they go to often on third downs, but definitely in the red zone as well. So if he's not out there as maybe you're in the passing game first, arguably number one option in the red zone, I think Jayden Reed just moves up as that next guy that you trust when you get to the red zone, which I trust this team to do so, projected for about 26 points as a team in this one. Tucker Kraft is a good shout. Tucker Kraft has been like a borderline top 12 guy, score a touchdown and you're successful like every other tight end. That tier of guys this year between 10 and 20. In 2 games this year where either Romeo Doubs and or Watson didn't play, he's averaging 7 targets per game. Again, that is a very small sample, but he's only averaging 3 targets per game when all of these guys are healthy, and it makes sense. There's just another talented receiver out there. Tucker Kraft basically becomes touchdown or bust in those games, gets a little bit more volume when those guys are out, so I do think he's a little bit more viable this week.
Pass attempts for Jordan Love is 32.5. I think the under might be in play there for Jordan Love, and right now in BetMGM, 72.5 rushing yards for Josh Jacobs. That seems very low based on what we've seen the last few weeks and what this weather could be. So I might take the over on Josh Jacobs on that. But anything else on this game, or are we good, man? I would love to see the passing game be a little more activated, Sal. I'm skeptical that this is going to be the week.
No, I think that's fair with the weather. As of right now, where the Vegas lines stand, I am going into this as if it's going to be a potential shootout. So for my end, I do like, in terms of like betting markets, I have Tua's completions were at 22.5. Love's were at 20.5. I ended up taking both of those overs, and now I am a lot more worried with the weather, so I'll be tracking that closely the next 24 hours.
Oh, man. It's that time of the year. Late November. We're almost to December. It's time to tilt about the weather, which is ultimately something that we are beyond unqualified to do. If the haters and losers out there think Sal and I aren't qualified to talk about football, which I'm sure there's some people that don't, we are definitely not qualified to talk about the damn weather and the effects on wind trajectory and things like that.
Listen, I live in Texas now, and it was 55 degrees last night, and I was in a hoodie and freezing. So, yeah, I have nothing to say when it comes to the weather, below average temperatures. So, Tua, like, I don't care if he can get 100 yards in a cold, freezing game, that to me is like a miracle. I don't know how people do it out there when it's negative 16 degrees last year in the playoffs for him. So, I'm cutting him some slack, throwing him some bail, because, look, anything below 50 for me is a problem.
Yeah, bro, you're talking to a guy who lived in LA for about a decade of his life. I'm not the person to be talking about weather either. So with that, now that we've embarrassed ourselves, let's take another quick break before we dive into the Black Friday matchup on the other side of it right after this. All right, we're back. Raiders at Chiefs. Black Friday football. The Chiefs are 13.5-point favorites, 42.5-point over-under. We've got this one on Friday here, Sal. Let's talk about the Raiders here, who are going to start Aiden O'Connell in this matchup. We learned that early Tuesday morning. Sure, why not? I know Gardner Minshew's obviously out for the season. You don't want to be playing no Desmond Ridder. So let's see what Aiden O'Connell can do. We don't care about anything in this game beyond how many times can you get Brock Bowers of football, and let's sprinkle in a little Jacoby Myers here too.
Oh, yeah, sprinkle in a little Jacoby Myers. He played one game earlier this year with Aiden O'Connell. 9 targets, 13.2 fantasy points is nice. When you break it back to last year as well with Aiden O'Connell, he's now averaging over that span 15.5 fantasy points, which is pretty good, I would say. It's a very small sample, of course, but solid. And now in 2 games with a new offensive coordinator these past 2 weeks since they came back from the bye, you're getting 10.5 targets per game for Jacoby Myers. He's coming off of a 120-yard performance. So I feel good about Jacoby Myers still. Like, there's a little bit of worry from me in week 11. They come out of the bye, new play caller. It seems like he's like not involved in the offense or as much as he was. That was a concern. All of those go away this past week for me. It looked like he was back and honestly looked a little bit better in a tough matchup against Denver. So Myers is a go. We know Brock Bowers is a go as well. I mean, this guy now is coming off of games of 10 targets and 16. He's been the priority basically all year long, but definitely with the new play caller in place these last few weeks. 5 catches for 58 yards earlier this year against the Chiefs. Not too concerned about that. Again, play caller changes some stuff up here, but it's kind of plug and play on the pass catchers. Like going from Gardner Minshew to Aiden O'Connell for me, one guy comes off IR, one guy goes on IR. There's really like not much of a difference in these guys. Obviously, their play styles. I think O'Connell opens up a little bit more of the downfield stuff. I don't really think they want to do that anyways in this offense for the most part. So for me, it's the same guys here. I don't know if you have anything different for the pass catchers.
No. Right now, there's no props up for anybody except Patrick Mahomes and Spencer Schrader, the Chiefs kicker, because we're a little bit of ways away from that game. So obviously, people can do their own research on that one. But I will say, we care about Brock Bowers. We care about Jacoby Myers, who is not a full-time slot receiver with the Raiders because he's their best receiver, so they play him outside a good bit. But he is a player who will travel into the slot at about 20-30% of his routes. He's a guy who kicks in there, and he has a history as a slot receiver. And the Chiefs are number 1 in yards allowed to players that line up in the slot and players that line up in line. Obviously, Bowers is a 56% slot player on the year. He's also obviously an inline tight end, so this should be a pretty nice moment for both of these guys, Bowers and Myers. Look, I'm not saying the Chiefs are on another holiday upset alert from the Raiders, but schematically, these two guys do match up with the defense well.
Yeah, and you're a 13-point underdog in this game, so we're going to get into the backfield. There's injuries there. There's Amir Abdullah now popping up, but for the most part, odds are the Raiders are going to be playing from behind. Whether they want to or not, you're going to get 35-plus passes, maybe even 40 from Aiden O'Connell in this one. So when these guys in Bowers and Jacoby Myers are basically the only guys in the passing attack, they're getting 25 to 30% of the targets a week. It feels pretty good that they'll both push towards 10 targets, and if that's the case, they got to be in your lineups.
And I mean, you said you want to talk about the backfield. You got anything to say about this damn backfield?
I mean, you got Amir Abdullah going for 17 fantasy points in PPR formats last week. He did it all, which is kind of like his thing as a pass catcher. Like, that's kind of why he probably still has, outside of special teams, like a role on this team. He's not much of a runner. We saw that this past week. Neither Zamir White or Alexander Madison practiced all of last week. Of course, track those injury reports this week. It is a short week on Friday, so there's a chance you get Abdullah again, and he's like the only guy they trusted. A 90% snap share. No Dylan Labe on offense. Labe, he was only on special teams, the rookie. Sincere McCormick, yes, that's a player. He was called up for this game, played like 5 snaps. So, like, no teams are on bye. Abdullah's not going to crack my top 30 running backs, even if Madison and White are out, especially in this matchup. But if you're pressed for it, you hope for 3 or 4 catches.
Let's talk about the Chiefs here, 13.5-point favorites. We don't know right now if Isaiah Pacheco is going to play in this game, so we might get another dosage of Kareem Hunt in a pretty favorable matchup here. Let's just hypothetically say there's no Pacheco, or maybe Pacheco plays and he's limited. If you've seen anything else on that I haven't seen, let me know. But like I said, pretty good matchup here. The Raiders' run defense, not very good. The Raiders' defense overall, not very good. So what are we thinking for this particular backfield here if Kareem Hunt has it all to himself?
Yeah, either way, I think I feel good about Kareem Hunt here. Like, I think there's a chance we see Pacheco be active. He's practiced now the last 2 weeks. Depending on where you're looking in the sources and the reports on this injury, it's something that probably is going to limit Pacheco for the remainder of the season in some form, whether that's explosiveness or actual snaps if they go out there and limit his role. If he was to return, I can't see this being the game as 13-point favorites on a short week, that they're really trying to get Pacheco going for 20 touches. Either way, I feel good about a dozen touches at least for Kareem Hunt here in a matchup that is good. Now, he had a great matchup last week, and he really couldn't get us there. He got bailed out by a goal line touchdown against Carolina, but I think you can feel good about going back to him. Another 19 total touches last week, 87 yards. It was still a fine fantasy day, and I do think Pacheco, at best, is going to be limited to 6 to 8 touches is what I feel like if he comes into this one.
Yeah, I think we view this as about the same way. So Kareem Hunt probably in that typical range that he's been for most of the year. In the passing game, Sal, talked about this in the waiver wire section. Noah Gray is not somebody that I think we should just completely ignore. You know, he's obviously has the touchdowns, but he's 4th on the team in routes the last few weeks. He has a real deal role here, and it makes sense. He's running more routes than DeAndre Hopkins so far for this team, and the Raiders are 27th in dropback success rate allowed. They're not a good secondary, not a good pass defense. So, again, everybody's available. There's no teams on bye. Maybe you're not desperate enough. I know I'm desperate enough spots to maybe consider Noah Gray with the streak that he's on right now.
Yeah, I'm probably not playing Noah Gray anywhere, but I do believe that his usage is legit. I mean, a 14% target share the past 2 weeks, 9 targets and 4 touchdowns on those. Like, of course, he's not going to sustain that production, but you have to also keep in mind, like, these are actual humans. Like, when Patrick Mahomes throws the ball to the guy and he's catching every single one of them and they're going for touchdowns and they're working and he's not stepping out of bounds like Xavier Worthy on every other deep attempt, it seems like, I think he's probably getting a little bit of a connection and feeling good with Noah Gray. And we've seen these kind of little spots pop up for Noah Gray in the past, but right now it seems legit when your competition is Justin Watson, Juju, DeAndre Hopkins, who is probably still playing with a tear in his knee, and then Xavier Worthy. Like, yeah, they probably want to get some other guys on the field. And if it's working, why not keep putting him out there for his 15, maybe 20 plus routes a game?
Yeah, I love it. The Raiders play a decent bit of man coverage too, which could leave Noah Gray on some deeper islands there down the field. Anything else in the passing game for Kansas City? I mean, they're a tough game. They're just a tough team to preview, Sal, because they're tough to figure out in the passing game, a little bit straightforward from the Mahomes and Kareem Hunt perspective.
Yeah, it's just crazy. If you told me that in 3 of his last 4 games, Mahomes would be finishing as a QB1, he's coming off of a game where he went for 329 total yards, multiple passing touchdowns for the 3rd time in the past month, and now he's facing a team with a bottom 5 sack rate, allow the 4th most passing touchdowns, I'd be like, oh, the DeAndre Hopkins trade worked so good. Xavier Worthy is popping off. And like, neither of these things are happening. Xavier Worthy, if you take out the one drive, and legitimately one drive against Buffalo, where he caught all of his 4 receptions, 61 yards and a touchdown, all came on that drive. Other than that, you're getting no fantasy usage from him. You're hoping to get 3 receptions in a game for him at this point. And yeah, Hopkins, I don't know how to explain it other than something maybe is going back up with the knee. Like, I don't know why he's running the 4th most routes behind Watson and especially Juju on the team. Hopefully that changes this week. But at this point, I don't want to start any of these guys in 10-team formats. And if you can avoid them in 12-team formats, I want to sit all of them outside of Mahomes, Kelsey, and potentially Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, I think we view this one the exact same. I'm moderately interested to watch this game, although I could see it being pretty ugly just from, I mean, shoot. The Chiefs play ugly games, and the Raiders are an ugly team, so I could see this game being a little bit of an ugly one. But that's going to do it for our Black Friday preview. Before we go, Sal, let's take a look at this week's injury report presented by healthcare.gov. Sal and I have to pick one injury we are monitoring that could have a major fantasy ripple effect this week. It can be a defender that leaves a matchup to exploit for an offense, a starter that goes down, potentially opening up a role for a backup or somebody else on the roster. It could be anything. Sal, who is your injury to watch this week?
Yeah, I'm looking at Trevor Lawrence coming out of the bye week for Jacksonville. We haven't seen Trevor Lawrence now in 3 weeks because of the bye. We've seen Mac Jones being there with the shoulder injury for Lawrence. And we really don't have like solid reports. Like they said about a week ago, we're not going to say anything on Lawrence's availability for week 13 against Houston. They play at home, so no travel here. That helps. We got to see the practice reports, but I think this is impactful because I want to be starting Brian Thomas, especially in a matchup against Houston where, look, this isn't a bad secondary or defense by any means, but we just saw last week Will Levis complete 65% or 75% of his passes against them, go for nearly 300 total yards. 4 different Titans pass catchers had at least 11 fantasy points, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when 4 are doing that, that's pretty good. You can get yours against Houston if you want. I need to see Trevor Lawrence. Like, I know 5 catches, 80 yards with Mac Jones last time we saw Brian Thomas. There was some nice usage in the short to intermediate range, which fits better with Mac Jones, but I can't be sitting here and saying that, yeah, I'll be okay if Mac Jones is out there. No, I need to see Trevor Lawrence. I think that's an injury that obviously is going to impact not only Brian Thomas's upside this week and rest of season, but other guys as well. I think Evan Ingram would be really the only other guy we're looking to start here. Maybe the backfield if you're in a pinch, but I'm waiting for this first practice report update. I was just refreshing. Nothing on Trevor Lawrence right now. I'm hoping he plays. They're 5-point underdogs at home. I don't even know what to make of that. That feels like it could be either Lawrence playing or not. Like there's no indication right there. So this is the biggest injury for me this week because of Brian Thomas.
Seems strange that Trevor Lawrence would want to come back and risk it for a team that's going nowhere this year, but this is also a coaching staff that wants to save their jobs. I would love to just see Trevor Lawrence back there. I don't even know if I want to see Trevor Lawrence back there, but I just want to see Brian Thomas as the first read as many times as possible. So I'm with Sal on this one. The player that I'm monitoring here is Cedric Tillman, who, as of today, is still in the concussion protocol. He does have an extra day to clear this because the Broncos and the Browns play on Monday night. But if he is out there, I'm very curious to see who Patrick Surtain ends up covering because Tillman has been the X receiver, whereas Jerry Jeudy's the flanker, so he moves into the slot a little bit. Theoretically, if Tillman is out there, he's the guy that's going to draw that tougher matchup more often than not. Even if Jeudy is the higher pedigree guy, he's been the most productive guy with Jameis out there. So that would be huge. If you want to start Jerry Jeudy in this matchup, in this little revenge game for old Jerry Jeudy against his former team and the coach who traded him away, and Sean Payton, you probably want Tillman to be out there. You want him to clear the concussion protocol, and you want him out there maybe potentially taking that harder matchup. Because if you look at the Broncos right now, obviously they limit number one receiver production, but secondary guys have gotten after them. Some of their other cornerbacks, Riley Moss is a good player, but you can get him. The guys in the slot, they allow the 13th most yards to receivers lined up in the slot this year. So maybe it's a spot where Elijah Moore can pick up a few more targets, but generally, if you want to play Jerry Jeudy this week, and I think a lot of people are going to want to play Jerry Jeudy because he's been playing well. He's been getting most of the targets from Jameis, and I think he's probably the best receiver on the roster right now in terms of like a fantasy perspective, especially with this Tillman injury. You probably want Tillman out there, but if he's not out there, that could potentially mean that Jerry Jeudy just gets the shadow coverage from Pat Surtain.
Yeah, and if there is no Tillman, maybe that bumps up, as you were saying, Elijah Moore a little bit, who's still available in over 80% of Yahoo leagues right now. No teams on bye doesn't become as much of a priority, but would potentially become a guy in this offense that is still ranking top 12 in wide receiver usage since Jameis took over. Comes in 6 targets minimum if there's no Tillman, probably upwards of 8 to 10 with some upside on them for Elijah Moore.
Love it. All right, that is going to do it. Before we get out of here, Sal, one last thing, and I said I was going to throw you a Thanksgiving question here at the end. I just want us both to have a space here at the end of the show to get off any Thanksgiving food-related hot takes because everybody's got feelings about Thanksgiving food, about food in general, Thanksgiving, the whole deal. I love Thanksgiving. It's probably my favorite holiday out there. Man, just totally gonna enjoy it. Always do. So, Sal, this is your space, safe space between me, you, the producers, and our trillions of listeners who and watchers on YouTube. Shout out to you all. Thanksgiving hot takes. Let one rip.
Yeah, listen, I really like turkey. Some people don't like turkey, so that's probably not a hot take. I would say in general, like the basic Thanksgiving foods that you're thinking about, you know, you got your gravy, your mashed potatoes. I'm not big on those. I get why people are. I'm not big on those. I like to spice it up. So for me, I'm making baked ziti right now, which is definitely not a staple at most Thanksgivings, but anything you can throw into a casserole, load it up with cheese. I don't care. Anything you can put in there. I had some baked potato casserole for a Friendsgiving yesterday. Phenomenal. Right. It was like hash browns inside of it. Just anything you could put in. Sausage stuffing I've had in the past. It's basically a casserole. Throw things into a casserole, make them, and I will eat it. I will think it is the best thing ever. I think that's what really makes Thanksgiving good for me.
I love that. Baked ziti. I dig it, man. Like, get creative. I'm in with you on this one. Yeah, I mean, I love that you said that about turkey. Like, everybody's, the turkey's gonna be bland, dry, and boring. Hey, how about you get off your asses and try hard? Like, make it good.
That's right.
There are so many people out there doing great work on friggin' social media showing you how to cook a turkey, okay? I'll be smoking mine, spatchcocking it. We're brining it this year. We're doing the whole thing. Put a little effort into your turkey to make it good. That's not my hot take. My hot take, though, is if your Thanksgiving gathering, Friendsgiving, whatever, doesn't have ham, don't invite me, okay? Ham gets a bad rap, but if your ham sucks, you suck. That's all I got to say, all right? Again, Malcolm Reed, shout out How to Barbecue Right. The raspberry chipotle ham, it is a staple for me every Thanksgiving. I don't eat ham. I mean, I eat ham like, little lunch meat ham, throw it into an egg scramble in the morning, get the protein in, baby. But I'm not like having carved ham at any other point in the year other than the holidays. Thanksgiving, a little bit of maybe Christmas too. Don't know, but that's the deal. All right. Your Thanksgiving does not have ham. Do not invite me. No, like it's, this will be my wife and I's number one first year not hosting Thanksgiving since we actually started dating. And obviously, long listeners over the summer know that she lost her mom this Thanksgiving. That was her favorite holiday. She loved the ham. So we bonded over the concept of the picking ham. If I could tell you one thing to do for Thanksgiving, make sure the ham is done before the food. You throw it out on the counter. You're picking at it all day. So you got a little appetizer there and something for the main dish too. So if your Thanksgiving gathering does not have ham, don't invite me.
Listen, Harmon, I'm about to make a very important text after this because I got a text about 2 weeks ago from my girlfriend's mom saying we won't be doing a ham this year at Thanksgiving. And I thought I was in the minority. I didn't want to push back. I just show up. I show up with my big ZD. I thought I was in the minority of being sad. Gathered with my girlfriend's brother the other night, and he said, what's up with no ham this year? So I think we kind of have to start a group chat. We'll see if we can contribute to it because this got me going. I'm happy other people share the sentiment. I'm ham over turkey personally. I'll still eat the turkey, but I think now I need a ham on Thursday.
All right. Well, let me tell you what. I will, whatever you need, whatever support you need from me.
I'll throw you in the group chat.
You want to throw me in the group chat with your girlfriend's mom?
This clip.
Fine. Go for it. Yeah. Clip the show. Send it to her. I mean, she'd be
like and follow.
Yeah, obviously, subscribe to the show, please. I mean, you're dating her daughter. She should be watching the show. Subscribe, support your work. Yeah, no, I mean, again, my mother-in-law was a big ham person, so that was not convincing. It was not hard to convince her to, okay, let's get the ham going. But that was literally her favorite part. I mean, she was a big Thanksgiving person, favorite part of the holiday. I'm convinced, Sal, that we can keep this tradition going on for you and the ones that you are close to as well. So yeah, whatever support you need from me, I'll send you the Malcolm Reed raspberry chipotle ham recipe, and you bring that. You're never getting questions about the ham. Let me just put it there.
All right, I'll be up late tonight cooking now, so we're good.
Love it. All right. That is going to do it for us today. Shout out to Sal Vetri. Shout out to Ham. Shout out to Thanksgiving. Shout out to Big ZD. Hope all of you have a happy Thanksgiving. This has been the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast presented by healthcare.gov. On Friday, Andy Behrens is going to join me to preview all of Sunday's Week 13 action. So when you recover from your Thanksgiving food coma, please check that show out. Until then, we are out.